Hey, what's up? It's Tesco back at it with another video. And in this one, I got a great question from my boy jBossup. He's asking, what's the biggest things I hear that separate an amateur mix from a professional mix? And, without further ado, let's get into the first one. The first one is going to be leveling, 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 leveling. I wish somebody beat it into my head how important leveling is when I first got into production, because every year after that, after learning all the cool shit that I thought would take me to the next level, multiband compression, fucking sound design, all this other shit, I realized year after year how much more I could have known about leveling and how much more particular I could have been with where I level my elements and just kind of fine dialing my ear to pick up on the nuances of the relationships between the elements. So the biggest thing when you're mixing is it's a balancing act of getting the relationships between all the elements correctly. And if you're not being, very tactful with your leveling, then you're going to destroy that balance between everything. And through leveling, that's basically how you're telling your listener subconsciously what order they should peel back the layers of the track. So, through how you level all of the elements in your song, through what's louder compared to the next element, compared to the next element, compared to the next element, it's like peeling back a cabbage or something of multiple layers. And no two cabbage leaves can exist on the same level. One is always on top of another one, which is on top of another one, and so on. So, this is basically how you communicate to your listener what's more or less important. Much like how in a movie, through the way the scene is shot, which character is in focus, which character is blurry in the background, which character occupies a majority of the scene. You don't need a Morgan Freeman voice in the character telling you pay attention to this dude or whatever. It's implied through the way that the scene is shot. So keep that in mind when you're leveling. Your ear can only really pick up on three things at a time. So, you know, make those three the spotlight of the mix, and then everything else that you're leveling needs to take a step behind that, like um I always say the top three elements, you should try and make them as big and as loud and as grand as possible to fill up as much of the mix, but then everything else gets as much space as is left. The top three get as much space as possible in the mix, and everything else gets as much space as is left afterwards. Just kind of fill those gaps and little holes that weren't able to be filled by the top three elements. So that's number one. Number two is people are very all or nothing, and want to find a set it and forget it, you know, way to process either their sounds in their drop or their vocals or whatever. And this is really shooting yourself in the foot, because if you're using the same elements as you are in the most intense section of your song, and they're at the same intensity and everything as you do in like the intro or the verse or something like that, then yeah, naturally it's going to be very hard to advance from there. Oftentimes I'll get tracks from producers and they'll be like, why doesn't my drop hit? And it's like, well, you're using all of the same sounds in your drop as you are in the intro. So where do you grow from the intro? The thing is, you need to give each section something special. So, you know, if the drop or the chorus or whatever, the special part is the intensity of it, you need to be varying that up. Maybe in other sections you're playing with the depth. Maybe you're taking out certain notes to make it more sparse. Ideally, a combination of everything. So I always think of, if we're watching Spider-Man, the climax, the arguably best part of the movie is the final battle where everything is at peak intensity and all that. But if that's what people really came to see the movie for, then we would just have 2 hours of Spider-Man at his peak, just kicking ass all the way through, and people would be happy with that. But we're not. Why? Is because people want to see the evolution of Peter Parker from the beginning. They want to see him develop his powers. They want to see him lose the first battle. They want to see him feel like more of a loser than he did in the beginning of the movie. They want to see him grow out of that. It's all about the character development and that kind of hero's journey idea. So think about, like, if you got one vocal channel carrying the whole song and that's how you kick off the verse, that's fine, but then give me another layer in the pre-chorus. Give me a harmony in the chorus. Give me something, but don't just be trying to find a set it and forget it kind of chain that you can just throw onto your vocals, for example, to carry them through the whole track. You can use that one chain as a basis to grow, to layer on top of, if you don't want to switch that main chain. But don't think that if you get the perfect chain, it's going to carry it through the whole song. Same with your drops, right? Like, the first thing I tell people is, if you have this element and it's playing at the same intensity in your build up or your intro, it is not going to slap when the drop hits. You need to find a way to maybe, bring it a little back in the distance. Maybe in the build up, you stretch out the sounds, you turn them into a riser. Maybe in the intro, they're super reverbed and delayed and they're just kind of swirling around your head, and it's just that first downbeat of the drop. It needs to start from some kind of lesser place and grow into its full peak potential. You can't just give me Spider-Man right off the bat and then, like, just show me Spider-Man throughout the whole movie, or just show me him at his peak and then you strip it back and then it's Peter Parker the whole rest of the movie. That just causes me to feel underwhelmed, or it causes the character to just feel stagnant, and then we don't get attached to it. Think about this. I don't care how cool your character is. In the real world, we don't just look around at people and be like, oh, that dude's rich and fucking ripped and all this shit. He's got everything going for him. That's who's going to be my friend. No. You choose your friends based on who you've seen in different circumstances. You've seen them happy. You've seen them lose their shit in traffic. You've seen them fucking destroyed after a breakup. You've seen them, through all kinds of different lenses, and that adds a dimension to their character that you wouldn't get otherwise. It's not so much about being the perfect character, it's more so about the hero's journey, the character development, the redemption arc. So switch it up. Don't give me just one intensity throughout the whole song. If you have an intro, let's say, if you're if you're a rapper and you're doing your yeah, little bitch, fucking on this beat, and then the beginning of the track, whatever, you're doing your little fucking introduction thing. Why is that the same intensity as the chorus? I don't understand. Pull that shit back into the mix, man. Tease it a little. Blue ball the listeners a bit. Don't just give it right off of the bat. Especially if what you're saying is not impactful in that section, then the vocal channel should not be the same level of impactfulness. You know what I'm saying? Same with your drops, if you're introducing it in the intro, I don't need that shit blasting me in the face first thing. Like, pull those bass noises back a little and make them a little more airy, take away the weight from them, introduce that gradually, make it relate to what section of the song we're in. Lastly, amount of high end. This is huge. Everybody intuitively understands that there's only so much space in the low end region of your song. If you want the bass to cut through, you got to cut the low end out on anything that doesn't need it. Same with the amount of high end. Amount of high end tells you where a sound is located depth wise, so forwards, backwards. If you're just never taking away high end on any sounds, then everything is kind of everything's kind of existing in this like area from right up front to like a couple steps back, but then you're losing out on at least half of the amount of depth available to you, and you're never going to get this fully 3D mix because everything's trying to cram itself into the spotlight. But think about like a breakdancer crew or something. if you see the Jabberwockies or whatever, there's like 15 of them, and you know, they all come out on the stage at once, but at any given time, only one or two of them walk out into the spotlight. They do their crazy thing while everybody else in the background is just kind of doing simplified versions of the dance moves, and they're just kind of chilling and just setting the ambiance and not doing anything too crazy. And then when the section changes, the guy or two up front, they pull back, they switch off with somebody else, then those guys do their thing or whatever. And the main idea is that everybody knows their place in the mix. So amount of high end is what dictates where something feels distance wise relative to you. So if you're not taking out high end on any sounds that don't need it, any layers that don't need it, then everything is going to be kind of right up in your face, fighting for your attention. In the case of vocals, right, you need to be thinking of a hierarchy. So if your main vocal's here, you don't want your supports and harmonies and ad-libs right there. You need to ask yourself, all right, I got my main. What's the next most important thing? All right, my support. All right, so maybe those are going to be a couple dB lower, and also I'm going to take out a bit of high end, maybe with just like a little slope guy. And then if you have harmonies, maybe you're going to do maybe a harsher kind of slope, maybe take out a little more lows, a little more highs. Then for the ad-lib, maybe you just do the sharp cutoff and you make it sound very telephone effect. And that's going to give you a hierarchy where everything is kind of sitting in its own place relative to what element is closer and further away from the listener. You feel me? So make sure that every layer varies the intensity accordingly. Same with your drops, right? If you're layering 3 noises on top of each other, one needs to be the main that occupies the mono, takes care of 80% of the fullness of the sound, and then maybe you have another layer that's more spread out. It takes care of the stereo, and then maybe you have one more layer that's pitched up and it kind of adds a new texture on top of the sound. But the idea is they're not all equally important to the mix. They're supplementing the main layer, which is already 80% of the way there and just needs a little extra here and there to just beef it up a little, to just give it what it's lacking. So that's honestly probably the biggest thing I see. If you don't ever take out the high end of your sounds, then that shit's gonna get muddy, just like your low end. The distance from 1K to 2K is the same distance from 10K to 20K. So, you know, 1K to 1.1K is a huge difference. 10K to 10.1K is not as huge of a difference to your ear because it doesn't pick up that much detail. You don't play a melody at 15K. It sounds like a mosquito buzzing around. So what your ears are actually picking up on is the amount of high end, and the amount of high end in the real world tells us where a sound is located relative to us. So compare something like ASMR, or whatever, whispering in someone's ear or whatever, takes very little energy compared to yelling across a football field, but it sounds way more crispy and present and high-endy than somebody yelling across a football field. It's because the mids of the sound are the actual core of the sound. The high end of the sound just tells us where it's located in the field of depth. If you're not EQing out any high end on anything that isn't, one of the main 3 sounds, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot as far as your mix. And that's just going to be a whole other headache too when you get into mastering and all that. So yeah, I would say a pretty good rule of thumb is anything that's not a top 3, besides like hi-hat and some percussions and shit like that, probably you're also going to want to take out high end. So that's my main 3 tips. Hope that helps. Let me know if you got any other questions. And with that, peace.